On today's episode, we're going to cover Snoop Dogg's 90s run and break down his family tree. This will consist of the artists he was directly responsible for that he brought into the game. For this reason, I'm not going to cover Warren G. I have another video for him because let's not forget, he's responsible for Snoop Dogg. We all know Snoop, his story, and his accomplishments, as he is arguably the most famous rapper in the world. I'm just here to remind you of his impact early in his career and the greatness that was cultivated under his umbrella. Now, to tell this story, we have to break down several events chronologically. Let's get it. Deep Cover, also known as 187, was the lead single off the soundtrack to the movie Deep Cover, starring Lawrence Fishburne. Released April 14th, 1992. This is the official solo debut single by Dr. Dre after his departure from NWA in 1991. The song was also produced by Dre, and this is the first introduction to Snoop on record and on video. Here we have The Chronic, Dr. Dre's debut solo album, released December 15th, 1992, under Death Row Records, officially founded earlier that year. Now, before I get started, Snoop, the intro. Protected by who? Pause, homie. Although this was Dre's debut album, this was also considered to be a rollout for Snoop Dogg as well, as he is featured on 11 out of 16 tracks on the album. Smart move. And this is where the family tree begins, because this was also the introduction to Daz and Corrupt, not yet the Dogg Pound, and Nate Dogg. Daz can be found on The Day the Ends Took Over. Gotta keep it clean. D's Nuts, High Powered, The Roach Outro, and B's Ain't Ish. Gotta keep it clean, once again. Corrupt can be found on Lyrical Gangbang, Stranded on Death Row, and B's Ain't Ish. Nate Dogg can be found on D's Nuts and Lil Ghetto Boy. Production was done mainly by Dre, but Warren G and Daz also had their hand in the mix as well. This album was, and still a classic, that single-handedly changed the game. When this dropped, it seemed like the world stopped. All you heard was this album playing everywhere, on repeat. Shout out to Dre. After The Chronic, Poetic Justice, the movie, comes out, followed by the soundtrack. Released June 29th, 1993. And here's the second time we hear Daz and Corrupt, officially named the Dogg Pound, on track number 10, Ends Don't Give a F. Gotta keep it clean. Produced by Dr. Dre. Side note, this soundtrack was also the second time we hear Nate Dogg on Mr. Grimm's song, Endo Smoke, produced by Warren G. Doggy Style, Snoop's debut solo album, released November 23rd, 1993. Something to think about. This album sold over 800,000 copies its first week alone. Physical copies, not streams. That's crazy. Produced entirely by Dr. Dre, although I believe Daz and Warren G had their hands in the mix as well. This was also the third time we hear Nate Dogg. Like I mentioned before, The Chronic was Snoop's rollout, and now Doggy Style will be the Dogg Pounds, as they're featured on 7 tracks. Keep in mind, there's 6 skits and 1 intro on here, and Snoop only has 4 other songs without them on it. So that means they're on more than half the album. That's genius. As far as I'm concerned, this was a classic, and you can play it start to finish. Every song is heat. But here's my favorites. Gin and Juice, The Shiznit, Who Am I, For All My N's and B's, Gotta Keep It Clean. And you can't tell me Daz didn't do that beat. Ain't No Fun. Once again, you can't tell me that's not Daz and Warren G. And why was Daz not on that song? I've always wondered that. Doggy Dog World, G's and Hustlers, and Pump Pump. Oh, and before I forget, there was one more song on here. G's Up, Hoes Down. Now, this version only came out on the first printed copies. So if you have this version, it's pretty rare because it wasn't on all of the printed copies. Above the Rim, released March 22nd, 1994. This would be Death Row's first movie soundtrack venture and release. This project had a variety of artists on it, and it's arguably one of the best soundtracks ever. But this is also where Nate Dogg takes off. The iconic Regulate with Warren G. This soundtrack also has 2 tracks by the Dogg Pound. Big Pimpin', which features Nate Dogg and Snoop, and Dogg Pound for Life, featuring Snoop, both produced by Daz. Next we have Murder Was the Case, released October 18th, 1994. Now this soundtrack was for the 18-minute short film directed by Dr. Dre and Fab 5 Freddy. Now if you're unfamiliar with who that is, do your research, look him up. Shout out to Fab 5. Now this movie was pretty dope, and it was the first time I've ever seen anything like it. It was pretty much an extended version of the video Murder Was the Case by Snoop Dogg that came out a year prior. The short film also stars the legend Charlie Murphy. Rest in peace. As far as the soundtrack, like I said before, this one was also one of the best soundtracks ever made. Now, since I'm only going to cover Snoop and his family tree, that's all I'm going to highlight on this soundtrack. This album has songs like Murder Was the Case remix. That bass line was sinister. What Would You Do by the Dogg Pound featuring Jewel. Man, she had vocals. Rest in peace. 21 Jump Street by Snoop Dogg. Now here's the introduction to Trey D. Keep that in mind. One More Day by Nate Dogg. Who Got Some Gangsta-ish? Gotta keep it clean. By Snoop Dogg featuring the Dogg Pound and Swoop G. And here's the introduction to Lil C Style. Keep that in mind as well. Come Up to My Room by Jodeci featuring the Dogg Pound. Oh, and I will do an honorable mention. Eastside, Westside by the Young Soldiers. Rest in peace to Big Y. And this brings us to Dog Food, the Dogg Pound's debut album, released October 31st, 1995. Man, I forgot it was Halloween when that dropped. Now, this is a classic, and not too many other albums can fade it from anybody, not even now. These dudes was ahead of their time. If I remember correctly, this album had 3 singles: Respect, New York, New York, and Let's Play House, featuring Michelle A. and Nate Dogg. Production was done almost entirely by Daz, with the exception of a couple of tracks that I'll name in a second. Mixed completely by Dr. Dre, and you can tell from a sonic standpoint. This is also the second time we hear Trey D on Reality. One intro, 15 tracks, one interlude. Every song is a standout, so no need to go through the track list. As I mentioned before, all tracks produced by Daz, except New York, New York, and Smooth, produced by DJ Pooh. Y'all better go do your research on him. A walking, living legend. Shout out to Pooh. The LBC Crew. This group consisted of members Lil C Style, who I mentioned earlier, Technique, and now here's the introduction to Badass. Best known for their song, Beware of My Crew, produced by LT Hutton, released November 14th, 1995, for the Thin Line Between Love and Hate soundtrack. The song featured Trey D and South Central, who were not members of the LBC Crew. Some people get that confused. It also featured Nate Dogg at the end of the song if you listen carefully. The group actually recorded an album titled Haven't You Heard between 1995 and 1997, but it was never released until 2011. The group broke up after not having much success, but each member went on to do their own thing. Badass released 2 solo projects under Doggy Style Records that I'll cover here in a few minutes. Technique went on and signed to Mac 10's label Who Bangin' and joined the group The Hood. Then after that, he signed to Game's Black Wall Street. I'm not sure where he is now. And Lil C Style stayed with Death Row, and you can find him on the 2 Gangsta for Radio compilation. And he later released an album titled Blackballed. Shout out to the LBC Crew. Dogfather, Snoop's sophomore album, released November 12th, 1996. Just 1 week after the release of Tupac's last official album, The Don Illuminati 7-Day Theory, under the alias Machiavelli. Now, at this point in his career, he just got acquitted for murder. Pac died 2 months prior, and this album will be the first without Dr. Dre's touches, as he has officially left Death Row. So you can only imagine the climate. This album wasn't received well, and it's not a fan favorite amongst a lot of people, but I beg to differ. This is one of my favorite Snoop albums. In fact, it's one of my top 5 from him. 1 intro, 3 skits, 1 outro, and 16 tracks. Production was handled mainly by DJ Pooh, Daz, Superfly, and LT Hutton. And in my opinion, they delivered a pretty solid album. My standouts: The Dogfather, featuring Charlie Wilson from the Gap Band. Now this will be our reintroduction to him as well. Up Jump the Boogie, featuring Corrupt, Charlie Wilson, and Tina Marie. May she rest in peace. If you don't know who she is, do your research, look her up. She had a voice out this world. Snoop Bounce, You Thought, featuring Too Short. Vapors, inspired by Biz Markie, rest in peace. Groupie, featuring the Dogg Pound, Nate Dogg, Warren G, and Charlie Wilson. That song felt like Ain't No Fun Part 2. OJ Wake Up, featuring Trey D. Snoop's Upside Your Head, featuring Charlie Wilson. Blueberry, featuring the LBC Crew. Doggyland, Downtown Assassins, featuring Daz and Trey D. And this album ends with a live performance by Tupac as an ode to his untimely passing. Rest in peace, Tupac Shakur. Retaliation, Revenge, and Get Back, released March 31st, 1998. Now this is Dazz's debut solo album. Although Snoop had already left, Dazz was still signed to Death Row. 15 tracks and one outro that was banging. Production was done by Dazz himself with a light sprinkle of Superfly. This is a classic West Coast album that never gets its just due. My standouts: Gang Banging Criminal, featuring Corrupt, Trey D, Badass, Superfly, and Technique. It's Going Down, featuring Corrupt and Prince Idol Joe. Player Partners, featuring Be Legit and Bo Rock from the Dove Shack. It's one of my favorite Daz songs. It Might Sound Crazy, featuring Too Short, produced by Superfly. Classic song. Our Daily Bread, featuring Corrupt. Now, was this beat a sped up version of Do What I Feel off Dog Food? Leave it in the comments. In California, shout out to Val Young on the vocals. Initiated, featuring Tupac, Corrupt, and the Outlaws. OG, featuring Snoop Dogg and Nate Dogg. Riding High, featuring Dub C. And Why Do We Bang outro. Classic album. G-Funk Classics, Volumes 1 and 2. Nate Dogg's solo debut album. It was recorded between 1995 and 1998. Originally released as a single album January 1997 by Death Row, but was taken down off the market due to legal issues with the label, then re-released as a double album July 21st, 1998, under Breakaway Entertainment. So, there's a story that this album was originally intended to be joint produced by Dr. Dre and Battle Cat, where Dre would do one half and Battle Cat the other. Can you imagine that? Production was centered around Daz, Superfly, Warren G, and LT Hutton. My standouts: First We Pray, featuring Corrupt. Crazy Dangerous. These Days, featuring Daz. Bag of Weed, featuring Trey D. Me and My Homies, featuring Tupac. Classic song. Because I Got a Girl. My Money. Never Leave Me Alone, featuring Snoop Dogg. Who's Playing Games? Just Another Day. She's Strange. This is my favorite song on here. This did the original song justice. If you know what that is, leave it in the comments. Stone Cold. Puppy Love, featuring Snoop Dogg, Corrupt, and Daz. Nobody Does It Better, featuring Warren G. Sexy Girl, featuring Big Psych. Dog Pound Gangsterville, featuring Snoop Dogg and Corrupt. The Game Is to Be Sold, Not to Be Told, released August 4th, 1998. This is Snoop's first album after he split ways with Death Row, when he joined forces with Master P at No Limit Records. Now, this move caused a lot of friction with Death Row as well within his neighborhood due to some of the members that he brought along the way that kept their alliance to Suge Knight, and they even took part in dissing him too. Now, I believe this was a smart move by Snoop. This was like a second win for his career, because keep in mind, at this point, Master P and No Limit had the game on lock. Now, I would agree that this wasn't my favorite album, and it was hard to digest at first because it was a different sound for him, but they eventually figured it out and got it right. And that's coming from somebody like myself. I was one of the biggest No Limit fans back in the day. I pretty much owned everything they dropped back then. Now, with that being said, this did have some heat on it. 20 tracks, 1 interlude. Production was handled mostly by Beats by the Pound. My standouts: Slow Down, featuring Mia X. Woof, featuring Fiend and Mystical. I must admit, in my opinion, that song didn't age that well. Show Me Love, featuring Charlie Wilson, produced by DJ Pooh. Don't Let Go, What You Gonna Do, featuring Master P. Still a G Thing. DOG's Get Lonely Too, featuring John B. Now, this is a remake of John B's song, They Don't Know. Game of Life, featuring Steady Mobbin'. This is my favorite track off the album. This song was banging. See You When I Get There, featuring C Murder and Mystical. Dogg's Gonna Get You, which is a play off Slick Rick's Love's Gonna Get You. Hoes, Money, and Clout, produced by Superfly. This is my second favorite track off the album. Word on the Streets, Badass's debut solo album, released September 29th, 1998. Like I mentioned earlier, he started off with the LBC crew, and after that, he was featured on a lot of Death Row releases. One that I have to highlight is Crazy by Tupac off the Machiavelli album. He had a good verse on there. This album had various producers, but the more notable ones would be DJ Pooh, Ant Banks, Superfly, and Gangster from the Conrads. His debut was pretty solid. 15 tracks, 5 skits. My standouts: We Be Putting It Down, produced by DJ Pooh, the legend. Shout out to Pooh. It also features Snoop. Ghetto Star, produced by Ant Banks. Now that beat was very similar to Troublesome 96. This Life of Mine, featuring the Outlaws. I always thought this sounded like the West Coast version of Get At Me Dog by DMX. Living It Up, Addicted to Crime, featuring the Comrades. Continued Dedication, featuring the Low Life Gangsters. And Everything Happens for a Reason, featuring Trey D. Corruption, released October 6th, 1998. Here we have Corrupt's debut solo album. This one was a double disc, with disc 1 being titled West Coast and the second titled East Coast. Now, up to this point, Corrupt was also still signed to Death Row, along with Daz. But here is where he left and formed the label Antra Records and released this album. I'ma keep it G. I wasn't really a fan of this album, so you might not agree with my take on this one, and that's cool. Disc 1, West Coast, 12 tracks. Production was centered around Battle Cat and Daz, with a sprinkle of Superfly, Warren G, Dr. Dre, Studio Tone, and Devontae Swing from Jodeci. My standouts: Play My Cards, Weak and Freak It, produced by Battle Cat. This song will forever be a classic. Seawalk, featuring Trey D and Slip Capone, another classic. Can't Let That Slide, featuring Roscoe. Disc 2, East Coast, 11 tracks. Production by D. Moet, Storm, Easy Mo B, and Devontae Swing. My standouts: It's a Setup and Light That Ish Up. Gotta keep it clean. Top Dog, released May 11th, 1999. Snoop's second No Limit release. Now this one is where I feel he got back into his groove. It was more West Coast than The Game Is to Be Sold. And here's the reconnection with Dr. Dre since Doggy Style in regards to his solo albums. My standouts: Buck 'Em, featuring Sticky Fingers from Onyx, produced by Dr. Dre. Trust Me, featuring Sugar Free and Silky Fine. Was that Charlie Wilson on the hook? My Heat Goes Boom. This song low-key sounds like Still a G Thing. I'ma skip Snoop a Fella. In Love with a Thug. Now, I might be wrong, but was this a reference to the song by Mr. Night Owl from San Diego, In Love with a Gangster? Anyway, rest in peace to Mr. Night Owl. Down for My Ends, Gotta Keep It Clean, featuring C Murder and Magic. Something About Your Business, featuring Raphael Sadiq from Tony. Be Please, featuring Exhibit and Nate Dogg, produced by Dr. Dre. That song was nuts. Doing Too Much, produced by DJ Quick. Party with a D.O.G., produced by Jelly Roll. Bussin' Rocks, produced by DJ Quick. Now, if you know the other version from Dead Man Walking, which one was better? Just Dippin', featuring Jewel, produced by Dre. Don't Tell, featuring Mossberg, Warren G, and Nate Dogg, produced by DJ Quick. My favorite track. To me, this was Ain't No Fun Part 3, R.I.P. to Mossberg. 20 minutes. Now, this is the first time we hear Goldie Loc. The song was produced by Goldie Loc also. Now, this song is what I feel put a battery in Snoop's back to go back to Long Beach and capture that pure essence of where he came from and what he was missing since 1994's Murder Was the Case and 95's LBC Crew when he tried to formulate a team under him besides Dogg Pound. The Streets Is a Mother, released November 16th, 1999. To many, this one will be considered his classic. And to me, this is his best body of work, even though I didn't like the entire album. Unlike Corruption, The Streets Is a Mother is super West Coast, and that style of production is what complements his lyrical style. Production was centered around Daz, Blacktoven, Superfly, and Fred Wreck. 18 tracks. My standouts: Who Ride With Us, Represent That GC, featuring Snoop, Daz, Trey D, J.O. Felony, Superfly, and Butch Cassidy. This was always my favorite song off here. Never Gonna Give It Up, featuring Snoop, Nate Dogg, Warren G, Trey D, and Superfly. You Can't Trust Nobody, featuring Daz. It Ain't About You, featuring Superfly and Trey D. Girls All Pause, featuring Nate Dogg and Roscoe. Now, I'm not gonna lie to you, I was never really a big fan of this song, but I cannot deny its success. Your Girlfriend, featuring Daz. Ho's a Housewife, featuring Dr. Dre and Hitman, produced by Dr. Dre. And this song can also be found on Dr. Dre's 2001. Step Up, featuring Exhibit and Crooked Eye, hosted by Daz like it was a mixtape. Nothing but bars on this one. West Coast legends. Live on the mic. Now, I gotta mention this one because it features the blast master himself, KRS-One. This was a very dope lyrical exchange between the two. And Calling Out Names, featuring Exhibit. My second favorite track off the album. One of the hardest diss tracks that never gets talked about anymore. Snoop Dogg presents The Eastsiders, released February 1st, 2000. Here's another one of the hardest groups ever formed on the West Coast. Snoop Dogg, Trey D, and Goldie Loc. This was not only big in music, but also in the streets of Long Beach. This caused an alliance between the Rolling 20s and the Insane, who before didn't have the best history. Production was handled by Battle Cat, Meech Wells, Superfly, Warren G, LT Hutton, and Goldie Loc himself, who was an underrated producer in my opinion. One intro featuring Dr. Dre, 3 skits, 18 tracks. My standouts, Now We Lay 'Em Down, featuring Cocaine. Side note, Cocaine and Nate Dogg are the GOATs at hooks. Ain't nobody fading either one of them. And them two together is a perfect combination. If you want an example, go search up Bottom Girl by the Eastsiders and you'll see what I'm talking about. The Eastsiders. Doghouse, featuring the Twins and Rappin' Forte, produced by Goldie Loc. Give It To 'Em Dog, produced by Goldie Loc, and that beat was knocking. Got Beef, featuring J.O. Felony and Silky Fine. Balls of Steel. G'd Up, featuring Butch Cassidy. Another Day, featuring Butch Cassidy. Ghetto, featuring Cam. Now, I just mentioned Cocaine and Nate Dogg together. Here's another one. The G and D. Pause. P Sales, featuring Sugar Free. LBC Thing, and Life Goes On. Doggy's Angels, also known as The Angels. Please Believe It, released November 21st, 2000. This group consisted of Big Chan, Cognac, and Cola Loc. The release of this album triggered a lawsuit by Columbia Pictures for the Charlie's Angels franchise because the name and the album cover art, which is why they changed their name to the Angels. The group broke up 2 years later after not much success. Production was handled mainly by Battle Cat and Fred Wreck. This album was low-key an underrated banger. 3 skits, 16 tracks. My standouts, Baby If You're Ready, featuring LaToya Williams. Side note, I don't know why she never blew up. She was dope. Her vocal range was crazy. Curious, featuring Snoop and Nate Dogg. Game to Get Over, featuring the Eastsiders. Gangsta and Me, featuring LaToya Williams. Cold Crush Gangsta, featuring Goldie Loc and Cocaine. Angels Make the World Go Round. Yak and Coke, featuring Snoop. Bet I Never Slip, featuring Sugar Free. Put Your Hands Up, featuring Snoop Dogg, Superfly, Cocaine, Rough Dog, and King Lou. and pop your collar to this. The Last Meal, released December 19th, 2000. Snoop's final album on No Limit. This is one of my favorite Snoop albums, and it was the best one from his No Limit releases. The reason for the name is because this was the last time Death Row partially owned any of his work. This one had producers like Dr. Dre, Battle Cat, Timbaland, Scott Storch, Jelly Roll, and Superfly. One intro, one skit, 17 tracks. My standouts: the intro, yes, the intro. Hennessy and Buddha, featuring Cocaine. True Lies, featuring Cocaine. Wrong Idea, featuring Badass and Cocaine. I'll touch more on this song in a second. Go Away, featuring Cocaine. Set It Off, featuring Ice Cube, MC Ren, Das, Corrupt, Nate Dogg, and the Lady of Rage. Stacey Adams, featuring Cocaine. Lay Low, featuring the Eastsiders, Nate Dogg, Master P, and Butch Cassidy. Bring It On, featuring Sugar Free and Cocaine. This is my favorite track off the album. Issues, Brake Fluid, featuring Cocaine. Losing Control, featuring Superfly and Butch Cassidy. I Can't Swim, Leave Me Alone, which is my second favorite track off the album. I just realized Cocaine was on 8 tracks. I never put that together before. I named 7, but there's one more that's not on my standouts. Personal Business, released July 17th, 2001. The reason why I bring this one into play is because it was a very underrated album and the last one under Snoop. Production was done mainly by Jelly Roll and Battle Cat, with a sprinkle of a couple of others. Not to mention, he had Dr. Dre and Busta Rhymes on skits. My standouts: Ready to Bang, featuring Snoop and Cocaine. Streets Illustrated, featuring Ice Cube. We From the LBC, featuring Snoop Dogg. How We Get Down, featuring Doggy's Angels and LaToya Williams. 2001 Four-Door Cadillac, featuring Razzcast, Silky Fine, and Butch Cassidy. Money to Fold, featuring Snoop Dogg and Corrupt. When You See Me, featuring Snoop, RBX, and Cocaine. Doghouse Riders, featuring Snoop, Sugar Free, Goldie Loc, and Cocaine. Don't Wanna Die, featuring Daz. And Wrong Idea, featuring Snoop Dogg and Cocaine. Like I mentioned earlier, this song was actually Badass's single for this album, but Snoop Dogg used it on The Last Meal. If you search the video, in the beginning it says Snoop Dogg presents Badass, Wrong Idea, and Life Ain't Hard. I would like to say rest in peace to Badass. Deuces and Trays, The Old Fashioned Way, released July 31st, 2001. The Eastsiders' sophomore and final album as a group. This was a solid follow-up from the first one, and I personally like this one more. Production was centered around Battle Cat, Fred Wreck, Meech Wells, and Jelly Roll. It also had a couple of tracks produced by High Tech and The Alchemist. One intro, one interlude, 18 tracks. My standouts: I Love It, featuring Cocaine and Sir Dogg. Eastside Riders, featuring Nate Dogg, Superfly, and LaToya Williams. Crip Hop featuring LaToya Williams. I Don't Know featuring Sugar Free, Superfly, and LaToya Williams. This is my favorite track off the album. Welcome to the House featuring Nate Dogg and the Angels. Friends featuring Cocaine. Gang Bang For Real featuring Badass. I Pledge Allegiance featuring Superfly and Cocaine. Now Is the Time, Trey D's solo track featuring Cocaine. Cool featuring Nate Dogg and Butch Cassidy. Dog House in Your Mouth featuring Sugar Free, Corrupt, Superfly, RBX, Rough Dog, King Lou, and the legendary Mixmaster Spade. Late Night featuring Cocaine and So Low featuring Lil Mo. On December 4th, 2001, Nate Dogg dropped Music and Me. This album was a banger. One intro, 13 tracks. Production was handled by various producers such as Bink, Mailman, Dr. Dre, Jermaine Dupri, Battlecat, and Fred Wreck, just to name a few. My standouts: I Got Love, Backdoor, Keep It Gangsta featuring Exhibit and Lil Mo, Your Wife featuring Dr. Dre, Can't Nobody featuring Corrupt, Another Short Story, Concrete Streets, Diddy Dumb Diddy Do featuring Snoop Dogg and the Eastsiders, and Music and Me, my favorite track off this album. At this time, I would like to say rest in peace to the legend. And you were right. Nobody does it better. Well, that wraps things up for today's episode, where I broke down Snoop Dogg's 90s catalog as well as his family tree. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't done so already, because I'm going to keep dropping this type of content. Till next time.